On July 2nd, 1944, the underground hospital cave near Cherbourg was thick with the stench of blood, smoke, and the acrid sting of boiled bandages. From the shadows emerged Dr. Schwester, her white coat hanging from weary shoulders, her hands raised in surrender, eyes squinting against the daylight she hadn't seen in days. Behind her, 8 German army nurses followed, blinking in the brightness, stepping hesitantly into a world they didn't yet realize would upend everything they believed. Just hours earlier, Dr. Schwester had insisted to her fellow nurses that American claims of abundant medical supplies were nothing more than Allied propaganda. But those doubts were about to be obliterated. In the final hours of the siege, she and her team had treated wave after wave of wounded Wehrmacht soldiers by candlelight, rationing every last drop of morphine, and reusing bandages until they disintegrated. None of them imagined they were about to encounter a level of medicine so advanced, so humane, and so well supplied that it would unravel not just their understanding of health care, but the very ideology they served. Colonel Richard P. Johnson of the U.S. 45th Evacuation Hospital looked upon the surrendering nurses not with animosity, but with professional interest. They were enemies, yes, but also fellow medical practitioners. Under the Geneva Convention, they would soon be returned to German lines. But before that, they would witness American wartime medicine in all its power, an experience that would leave deeper impressions than their brief captivity ever could. The process of shattering German assumptions had begun over a year earlier, in May 1943, when General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim surrendered in Tunisia. Among the 250,000 Axis troops captured were thousands of German medics, orderlies, and Red Cross nurses. Many had served with Rommel's Afrika Korps, enduring 2 brutal years of desert warfare. Decorated nurses like Ilse Schultz and Greta Falk, once proud symbols of German resilience, found themselves stunned by what they encountered in captivity. On board the Liberty ships bound for America, mass-produced vessels the Nazis had once deemed logistically impossible, German nurses discovered medical bays lit with steady electric lights, outfitted with X-ray machines, refrigeration units for blood plasma, and shelves lined with sterile supplies. Where German medicine still relied on direct transfusions and sulfur rationing, Americans had entire units of plasma ready for use, saving lives with technologies that seemed decades ahead. In the United States, the shocks continued. At prisoner of war camps, German nurses were given medical exams, dental care, new eyeglasses, and treatments for chronic illnesses. At Christmas, they received packages of chocolate, cigarettes, and soap, luxuries their own families hadn't seen in years. For women raised on propaganda that painted Americans as weak and decadent, the generosity of their captors was almost incomprehensible. In camps such as Opelika in Alabama, these nurses worked in fully equipped hospitals, sometimes alongside American counterparts. They saw surgical lamps that adjusted with precision, electric cauterization, rapid sterilization with autoclaves, and fully stocked pharmacies. But nothing was more revolutionary than penicillin. For women who had watched countless soldiers die from infected wounds, the idea of restoring men to health in days was nothing short of miraculous. Where they would have amputated, Americans saved limbs. Where they anticipated death, Americans restored life. Perhaps most transformative of all was the human element. Many of the nurses they encountered were black women, educated, respected, and commanding authority. These women corrected German techniques, issued orders, and demonstrated medical expertise that dismantled everything Nazi ideology had taught about race. The presence and professionalism of these women challenged not just clinical norms, but the moral foundations of the Reich's worldview. For the captured nurses, it was a moment of profound reckoning. By 1944 and 1945, German medical personnel in U.S. captivity were being retrained. They studied public health, sanitation, epidemic control, and vaccination, knowledge that would become critical in post-war Germany. Many were stunned to discover that the very medical breakthroughs they admired were the work of Jewish scientists, the same people their government had expelled, imprisoned, or executed. Captivity taught a lesson the Reich had never intended them to learn. Medicine is not a tool of ideology, but a force for healing. American doctors treated German POWs with the same care as Allied soldiers. They witnessed prisoners receiving better treatment than many civilians back home in Germany. And they saw that when freed from political dogma, medicine could save lives on a scale unimaginable under Nazism. When the war ended, many of these nurses returned to a shattered Germany. Hospitals lay in ruins. Supplies were scarce, and the sick and wounded overwhelmed every system. But they brought back not only new techniques, they brought back a new philosophy. These women founded modern nursing schools, rebuilt hospitals, and implemented blood banking, antibiotic treatments, and professional medical standards they had learned in captivity. Some would later say that their time as prisoners was not a humiliation, but a transformation. They had arrived believing in German superiority. They left convinced that medicine must serve all of humanity. One nurse would later write, "We arrived as prisoners. We left as witnesses to medicine's true purpose." This is one of World War II's quietest, yet most profound victories. Through science, compassion, and overwhelming capability, American medicine accomplished what no propaganda could counter. The minds of their enemies were not conquered by guns, but by evidence. And the legacy of that moment still echoes in hospitals and clinics rebuilt in the ashes of war. It was not just a military victory. It was a moral and medical one, reshaping the future healing for generations to come.